Marcus, we're gonna need you to step away from the truck for a second.
Fine. I'm just starting my route. What is this about?
That is Marcus Dell Hargrove, 44 years old, Decatur, Georgia. Officers arrived at the Decatur Central Delivery Unit on Commerce Drive at 7:12 in the morning while Hargrove was loading his satchel for the day's route, the same route he had run for 11 years. Over the previous 3 years and 7 months, he had intercepted 214 checks from outgoing and incoming residential mail across 3 zip codes, chemically altered the payee names, and deposited them into accounts he controlled across 3 states. The total, $1,847,312.44. He kept a spreadsheet. He updated it after every deposit. He said he was just moving them through.
Marcus, we have records of 214 accounts. We have your account numbers. We're placing you under arrest.
I was just full, bro. Moving them through.
By the time the Postal Inspection Service arrived at the Decatur Central Delivery Unit on Commerce Drive on the morning of September 6, 2023, they had been building this case for 4 months. They had the altered check images. They had the bank records spanning 11 accounts in 3 states. They had the 2 prepaid phones bought for cash in DeKalb County. And they had the spreadsheet, which is still the most remarkable thing about this case. A spreadsheet he had maintained himself, on his own laptop, on his own home network. 214 rows. Date, original amount, altered amount, payee, deposit account, status, column by column, updated after every transaction. When Investigative Inspector Renata Osei first opened that file and scrolled to the bottom, she stopped at row 47 and sat back in her chair. And then she kept scrolling. The officers approached Hargrove in the parking lot while he was loading his satchel for the morning. He had been on this route for 11 years. He had no reason to believe the day was anything other than what it had always been. When Osei told him they had records of 214 accounts, that they had the account numbers, the check images, the spreadsheet, Marcus Hargrove's arms dropped from where they'd been crossed over his chest and fell to his sides. He turned his face slightly to the left. His eyes closed for a single moment. Then he said it. I was just moving them through. Not a denial. Not a question, not a request for a lawyer, just that. As if the checks were parcels caught in a sorting delay, destined to arrive eventually. As if $1.8 million was in transit, not gone. Wow, I was just moving them through. He said it again, quieter, half to himself. I was just moving them through. That line will come back. Marcus Dell Hargrove diverted $1,847,312.44 from the United States Mail over a period of 3 years and 7 months. He targeted 214 accounts across 3 residential zip codes in the Decatur metro area. The checks he intercepted ranged from $214 to $94,400. He altered payee names using a chemical washing process, routed deposits through 11 accounts registered under multiple names, and successfully cleared 196 of the 214 checks before investigators closed in. He had been a United States Postal Service letter carrier for 11 years. He was 44 years old the morning they arrested him in the parking lot. He will be 58 years old before he is eligible for release. How does a man who carried the mail for 11 years steal nearly $2 million of it? How does he sit across from his coworkers at the same sorting table every morning for 3.5 years and say nothing? How does he look at the names on those envelopes and keep going? That is what this story is. How much do you trust the people your daily life depends on? And what happens when that trust is the weapon? Subscribe. We cover cases like this every week. Marcus Dell Hargrove was born on September 12, 1979, in Macon, Georgia, the second of 3 children to Raymond Hargrove, a machine operator at a textile plant who earned $13.40 an hour, and Dolores Hargrove, who cleaned offices at the Bibb County Courthouse from 4 in the afternoon until 11 at night. They rented a wood frame house on Ashby Street, with a front porch that sloped 3 inches to the right and a backyard where Raymond kept a vegetable garden from April through October. Marcus shared a bedroom with his older brother, Darnell. The 2 of them built model cars on a folding table between their beds, painting and labeling each one, lined up on the windowsill in order of completion. Marcus kept separate mental tallies of which cars were his and which were Darnell's. He was 9 years old. He was a careful student at Ballard Hudson Middle School. Not exceptional, but consistent. He finished assignments before the deadline. He rarely had to be asked twice. His 7th grade homeroom teacher, Gloria Attaway, wrote on a progress report that Marcus takes his responsibilities seriously and can be counted on. He played junior varsity basketball for 1 season and quit when his grades slipped by a single-letter grade. He did not try out again. That was not failure. That was calculation. He looked at the cost and decided it wasn't worth it. He graduated from Central High School in Macon in 1997 with a 3.1 GPA and enrolled at Macon State College that fall to study business administration. He lasted 2 semesters. Raymond Hargrove had a stroke in January of 1999 that took most of the use of his left hand, and the textile plant had no position that accommodated the injury. Marcus left school in February and took a job at a distribution warehouse on Riverside Drive, sorting packages for $9.80 an hour. He was 19. He sent money home on a schedule. Not everything, but a consistent amount, on the 1st and 15th of every month without being asked. Dolores Hargrove later said that he never missed a payment. Not once, she told investigators. Not in 4 years. He relocated to the Atlanta metro area in 2003, working briefly in a package fulfillment center in College Park. In 2006, he applied to become a United States Postal Service city carrier assistant. He told his then-girlfriend, Sharice Woodley, that he wanted a job with a route, the same streets, the same houses, the same sequence, every day. He said he liked being reliable. That was his thing, Sharice would later say. He wanted to be the person people could count on. He liked that feeling. He chased it. He became the person people could count on. The United States Postal Service is the largest civilian employer in the country, operating with approximately 600,000 career employees and an additional 136,000 non-career workers handling mail that reaches nearly 162 million delivery addresses each day. Among those employees are roughly 230,000 letter carriers, the men and women who run the routes. They are federal employees. The mail they handle is federally protected. Tampering with, stealing, or destroying mail is a federal offense under 18 U.S.C. Section 1708, carrying penalties of up to 5 years per count. The oversight system for carriers combines GPS tracking on postal vehicles, supervisor check-ins, delivery scan data, and complaint reporting from recipients and businesses. A carrier who generates a pattern of missed scans, unresolved complaints, or unusual off-route time can trigger a formal review by the Postal Inspection Service, the federal law enforcement arm of the USPS, with subpoena authority and the power to work alongside the FBI and U.S. attorneys' offices. On paper, the system has teeth. In practice, it is built to process volume, not to scrutinize individual pieces of first-class letter mail. On any given day, the Decatur Central Delivery Unit at 880 Commerce Drive processed approximately 44,000 pieces of mail. Most of that mail moved without any individual piece being tracked by name. The Decatur Central Unit served residential and business corridors across zip codes 30030, 30032, and 30033. It employed 34 letter carriers, 9 post office clerks, and 4 supervisory staff. Yet its protocols for outgoing first-class mail, the category that includes personal checks, required only that the mail volume match the carrier's pickup manifest. No individual piece was logged. No individual piece was scanned. The system was built on one assumption, that the person in the carrier position would do their job. It did not account for Marcus Hargrove. Hargrove was hired as a city carrier assistant in September 2006 and converted to full career status, pension accrual, union protections, health benefits, in March 2009. His hiring file from 2006 reflected a clean federal background check, 3 favorable references, and a supervisor interview that noted he was well organized and attentive to process. His 2010 and 2011 performance evaluations both rated him as exceeds expectations across accuracy, reliability, and customer relations. His 2013 annual review included a handwritten addendum from Supervisor Clayton Reeves. Marcus is the carrier I send to a new route when I need someone who will figure it out without creating problems. He's one of the ones you don't have to worry about. He was assigned to Route 2241 in the 30032 zip code in February 2012. Following the retirement of the previous carrier. He held that route for 11 years. He knew which houses had dogs, which gates were left unlatched, which mailboxes didn't close properly in the rain. He knew which families received regular bank correspondence and which addresses generated heavy outgoing mail on the 1st and 15th of the month. He had been, in every measurable way, exactly the person the institution understood him to be. The first check Marcus Hargrove took from the United States Mail was lifted from an outgoing residential box on Glendale Avenue in the 30032 zip code on March 7, 2020. It was a personal check made payable to the Fulton County Water Authority for $214. He had seen the envelope before he picked it up, the window cutout, the return address, the faint rectangular outline of the check inside. He had seen thousands of envelopes exactly like it over 14 years. This time, he did not put it in the satchel. He knew about check washing. He had learned about it in 2018 from a USPS fraud awareness bulletin distributed to all letter carriers, intended to help them identify tampered envelopes in the mail stream. The bulletin outlined the chemical process in precise detail, which solvents dissolved ink without degrading paper, how long the treatment took, what to look for in the check stock afterward. The bulletin was a warning. Hargrove read it as a manual. He took the check home and spent 4 hours at his kitchen table with acetone, a fine bristle brush, and a steady hand. He removed the payee name and the dollar amount, preserving the paper, the routing number, the account number, and the signature. He filled in his own name as payee and altered the amount to $2,140. He deposited it into an account he had opened 4 months earlier at a credit union in Stone Mountain, Georgia, using a slightly modified version of his name. The check cleared in 2 business days. The water authority flagged the discrepancy 11 weeks later. By then, the account had been drained and closed. No one connected the flag to Route 2241. Marcus Hargrove went to work the next morning, loaded his satchel from the sorting bins, and ran his route the same as always. Nothing happened. And so he did it again. The second check came 11 days later, a payroll check from an accounting firm in Buckhead, drawn for $780, which Hargrove altered to $7,800 and deposited into a second account at a regional bank in Lithonia. It cleared. The next, taken in May of 2020, was a personal check from a 74-year-old retired schoolteacher named Dorothy Pruitt to her church's building fund. $520 converted to $5,200. Pruitt did not reconcile her accounts regularly. That discrepancy went undetected for 4 months. By July of 2020, Hargrove had taken 9 checks totaling $42,170. He was meticulous. He photographed each check before and after alteration. He logged the original amount, the altered amount, the payee name, the deposit account, and the date. He used 2 prepaid phones purchased for cash at a grocery electronics kiosk in DeKalb County. One for personal use, one kept in a lockbox bolted to the frame under his bed. He understood that his access to residential mailboxes was practically invisible within the volume of the daily mail stream. There was no individual tracking on letter-size first-class mail. There was nothing to trace. In September of 2020, he expanded beyond his assigned route for the first time. While covering a sick colleague's route in the 30030 zip code, a standard practice, logged and approved by supervisors, he intercepted 4 checks in a single afternoon. Among them was a mortgage payment envelope from Gerald and Patricia Ames, 71 and 68 years old, who had lived on Claremont Drive for 29 years. The check was made payable to their lender for $1,244. They were 8 months from paying off a house they had purchased in 1994. Gerald worked part-time at a hardware store 3 days a week. Patricia had retired from nursing 2 years earlier. They had paid their mortgage on the first of every month for 29 years and had never missed one. Hargrove took their check, altered it to $12,440, and routed the deposit through an account registered under a secondary name he had established in Tennessee. It cleared. The Ameses received a delinquency notice from their lender 6 weeks later. They spent 3 months trying to understand what had happened to a payment they knew they had mailed. In March of 2021, a postal clerk named Priya Sudhakar, who worked the intake window at the Commerce Drive unit, noticed that outgoing mail from 2 residential streets on Route 2241 was generating a higher-than-average rate of check-related complaints, customers calling to ask why their payments hadn't been received. She mentioned it to Unit Supervisor Thomas Burrows during a shift handoff. Burrows logged it as a quality control note and assigned a secondary scan protocol to outgoing parcels on that route. The protocol applied to packages and padded envelopes. It did not apply to first-class letter mail. The complaints slowed, not because Hargrove had stopped, but because he had temporarily redirected his activity to routes he was covering for other carriers, where no flag existed. The quality control note expired after 90 days with no escalation. By December of 2021, the total Hargrove had taken had surpassed $400,000. In the spring of 2022, he escalated. He began targeting business checks, accounts payable envelopes from small businesses, legal offices, and medical practices that regularly mailed payment by check through residential forwarding addresses or business P.O. boxes. These ran significantly larger. A single altered check drawn on an orthodontic practice on Lawrenceville Highway yielded $38,000 in one transaction. He distributed deposits across 4 accounts in 3 states, Georgia, Tennessee, and North Carolina, transferring funds between accounts using peer-to-peer payment apps in between, creating a layered pattern designed to make individual deposits appear unrelated. He was not a trained money launderer. He had read about layering techniques online, in a financial crime overview that had been published by a banking compliance organization, and adapted the method. That was consistently how he operated. He read carefully. He took notes. He applied what he learned. The closest he came to being caught happened in August of 2022. A fraud analyst at Palmetto Federal Credit Union flagged a deposit of $47,000 into an account that had been opened 3 months earlier with minimal activity and an address that did not verify to a known residential location. The analyst contacted the account holder, a name Hargrove had constructed, and received no response. The account was frozen. Hargrove was aware of the freeze within 48 hours. He did not attempt to access the $47,000. He walked away from it entirely, abandoned the account, and waited. The credit union's internal review concluded in November 2022 with no connected identity. The $47,000 was never linked to Hargrove or to Route 2241. By January of 2023, he had successfully deposited checks totaling $1,714,000. By the morning of his arrest in September, the spreadsheet showed $1,847,312.44. The case he built could not last forever. 3 people made sure of that, but only one of them set it in motion. There is a reason to pause here and think about what $1.8 million means to the people it was taken from. Not in the aggregate, in the specific. Dorothy Pruitt, 74, had taught 4th grade at Avondale Elementary School in Decatur for 31 years before retiring in 2007. She lived alone in a house on Fayetteville Road where every windowsill had something growing on it. African violets, pothos, a Meyer lemon tree that had never actually produced a lemon. The church check Hargrove took in May of 2020 was the first of 7 checks he would pull from her address over the following 28 months. The amounts he altered ranged from $1,900 to $6,400. Total loss from her account, $19,400. Pruitt did not discover the theft until April of 2022, when she attempted to donate to a community relief fund and her bank declined the transaction. Her checking account balance was $117. She had believed it was somewhere above $22,000. She had not opened a new bank statement in over a year. When the investigator met with her in October of 2023, she said quietly that she had canceled her supplemental health insurance the previous spring because she thought she'd already spent that year's premium on a trip to visit her grandchildren. A trip she later realized she had not taken. Gerald and Patricia Ames received their first delinquency notice from their mortgage lender in November of 2020. The dispute process took 14 months and 2 rounds of formal appeals. By the time it resolved, they had paid $4,300 in accumulated late fees and interest charges. A refinancing penalty pushed their final payoff date back further still. They did not own their house free and clear until May of 2023, nearly 4 years after the date Patricia had written in her handwriting on a sticky note, which she had pressed to the frame of the original mortgage documents hung in the hallway. They looked at that sticky note every day for 4 extra years. Kevin Okafor, 38, a logistics coordinator for a freight company in College Park, had mailed a cashier's check for $24,000 in March of 2022 as a down payment on a residential property in Stone Mountain. It was his first home purchase. He had saved for 6 years. The check never arrived. The seller canceled the transaction 3 days before closing and retained his $3,500 earnest money per the purchase contract. Okafor spent the following 6 months in mediation and failed to recover the earnest money. He lost the property. He watched the sale price on comparable homes in that area rise by $40,000 over the following year. On June 14, 2023, a Postal Inspection Service financial crime analyst named Calvin Desch sat down with a quarterly fraud correlation report for the Atlanta district, a routine audit, the kind that produced no findings most of the time. And he was matching complaint address data against active carrier assignments. He noticed that zip codes 30030 and 3003 showed an above-average rate of check-related payment disputes over the previous 18 months. Not dramatically high, but statistically inconsistent with comparable zones in the district. He ran the carrier assignment overlay. 7 carriers had touched both zones during the relevant period. 6 of those 7 had clean complaint profiles and no GPS or scan anomalies. The 7th was Marcus Hargrove. Desch pulled Hargrove's complete route data for 36 months and mapped it against the complaint origin addresses. Of 41 complaints he identified in the dataset, 34 had originated from addresses on or immediately adjacent to routes where Hargrove had been either the assigned carrier or the temporary covering carrier. He sat with that number for several minutes. Then he took the correlation map to his supervisor and to Supervisory Inspector Renata Osei. Osei had been with the Postal Inspection Service for 16 years. She had worked financial crime cases in Atlanta, Cincinnati, and Miami. She looked at Desch's overlay map for approximately 2 minutes. Then she picked up her phone. Osei opened the formal investigation on June 19, 2023. She subpoenaed bank records across 12 financial institutions in 3 states, cross-referencing account numbers from altered check images that bank fraud departments had retained in their dispute files. She obtained Hargrove's cell carrier location data and established a consistent pattern. On the dates of deposits in Georgia, Tennessee, and North Carolina, the Hargrove's phone had placed him near the respective bank branches during windows that aligned with his days off or his early-end delivery days. She applied for a search warrant on a storage locker rented under a secondary name at a facility on Memorial Drive in Decatur. The warrant was granted on August 9th. Osei's team entered the locker on August 11th. Inside, they found a steel lockbox containing a prepaid phone with 214 outgoing transfer confirmations in the payment app history, 3 manila folders, each containing printed photographs of checks, before and after chemical alteration, in sequence, labeled by date, and, on the shelf above the lockbox, a laptop computer. It was unlocked. On the desktop was a single file, R2241_RECONCILE.XLS. She opened it. 214 rows, each one carrying a date, with an original payee name, an altered payee name, the original check amount, the altered amount, the deposit account routing, and a status field. Most rows showed CLR. 18 showed RET. The final entry was dated August 3, 2023, 8 days before the locker search. It documented a check drawn on the account of a retiree named Clarence Whitfield, originally written for $1,420, altered to $14,200. Osei printed the spreadsheet. She drove back to her office. She called the U.S. Attorney's office from the car. The case she had estimated would take 4 months to build had already been built by Marcus Hargrove himself. He had documented 1,291 days of mail theft in a color-coded spreadsheet and stored it on an unlocked laptop in a rented storage locker. The total are reconciled against every bank record and check image in the investigation file. $1,847,312.44. The officers arrived at the Decatur Central Delivery Unit at 7:02 in the morning on September 6, 2023. Hargrove's shift began at 7. He was in the rear sorting area loading his satchel from the pre-sorted mail bins. The same task, the same position, the same time, the same every morning for 11 years. He was in his full uniform, his route keycard and badge on the lanyard, his navy cap pulled low. Beside the sorting table, on the corner of the surface nearest the wall, was a paper cup of coffee from the break room. Steam was still visible above the rim. Inspector Osei entered from the facility entrance with 2 uniformed officers. A second team of 3 agents waited at his postal vehicle, LLV number 4417 Bay 9. In the event he ran. Why, he did not run. When the officers called his name and told him to step away from the truck, he looked up from the satchel, brow furrowed, lips parting around a question that didn't quite form. He said he was just starting his route. He set the satchel down on the sorting table. He walked with them to the parking lot without being asked twice. In the parking lot, when Osei told him they had records of 214 accounts, that they had his account numbers, the altered check images, and his spreadsheet, Hargrove's crossed arms dropped to his sides. His head turned slightly to the left. His eyes closed for a count of 4. The composure he had maintained for 11 years held for exactly that long. Then it was over. He said, "I was just moving them through. No denial, no negotiation, no request for a lawyer, just that." As if $1,847,312.44 was in the middle of a route briefly delayed going to get where it was going eventually. I was just moving them through. Quieter, the second time. Barely above the sound of the HVAC fan running on the roof. The handcuffs closed at 7:21 a.m. 3 of his coworkers stood at the facility entrance, one still holding a clipboard, none of them moving. His coffee cup was on the sorting table inside, still warm. His satchel was on the asphalt of the parking lot, full of the day's mail for Route 2241. Mail that would not be delivered that morning by Marcus Hargrove. Mail that would sit until the post office sent someone else. Marcus Dell Hargrove was charged on September 6, 2023, with the following federal counts. 18 counts of mail theft by a postal employee in violation of 18 U.S.C. Section 1709, each carrying a maximum of 5 years. 14 counts of mail fraud in violation of 18 U.S.C. Section 1341, each carrying a maximum of 20 years. 8 counts of bank fraud in violation of 18 U.S.C. Section 1344, each carrying a maximum of 30 years. 4 counts of aggravated identity theft under 18 U.S.C. Section 1028A, and 1 count of money laundering conspiracy under 18 U.S.C. Section 1956. H. Maximum total exposure: 512 years of federal imprisonment. Bail was set at $250,000. He did not post bond. Trial commenced on February 12, 2024 in the United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia, Courtroom 16 of the Richard B. Russell Federal Building on Spring Street in Atlanta. The presiding judge was the Honorable Margaret L. Caulfield, who had been on the federal bench for 22 years. The prosecution was led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Darnell Pugh, 39, with Second Chair Melissa Brandt. Defense counsel was Thomas A. Kellerman of Kellerman and Cross, who had spent the preceding 5 months attempting to have the spreadsheet suppressed on Fourth Amendment grounds. He failed on all motions. Pugh's prosecution built on 3 interlocking pillars: the spreadsheet, the bank records, and the 196 check image pairs, original and altered side by side, pulled from bank fraud archives across 3 states. His argument was methodical. Hargrove had not acted impulsively or opportunistically in a moment of financial desperation. He had built a system. He had maintained it, documented it, and refined it across 1,291 days. The spreadsheet alone, Pugh argued, was not the record of a man who had made a mistake. It was the record of a man who had made a decision 214 times. And the defense's theory was contamination, that Hargrove's secondary accounts had been compromised by a third party, and that Hargrove had been an unwitting conduit. That theory collapsed on the 6th day of testimony, when a forensic digital analyst testified that R2241_RECONCILE.XLSX had been created, saved, and accessed from a single device registered to Hargrove's home Wi-Fi network on 214 separate occasions, each access timestamp corresponding within hours to the date of a listed transaction. The moment that defined the trial came on day 8. Dorothy Pruitt took the stand. She was 76 years old. She answered every question about her account balance, her canceled insurance, and the 7 checks in a flat, steady voice. When Prosecutor Pugh asked if there was anything she wanted to say, she folded her hands on the railing in front of her, looked at the courtroom, nodded at Hargrove, and said, "I trusted the mail." She did not elaborate. She didn't need to. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 40 minutes. On April 3, 2024, Judge Margaret L. Caulfield sentenced Marcus Dell Hargrove in Courtroom 16 of the Richard B. Russell Federal Building. Before she read the sentence, she addressed him directly. He stood at the defense table in a gray suit, hands clasped in front of him. She said, "You were given a federal trust. You held the mail of 214 families and businesses, their payments, their savings, their obligations to one another, and you treated it as inventory, not once and not by mistake, but 214 times across 1,291 days with a spreadsheet to keep score." The most remarkable thing about this case is not the dollar amount. It is that you kept records. You knew exactly what you were doing. You chose to do it anyway, every single time. She paused. The courtroom did not move. The people on your route never knew your name. They trusted the uniform. They trusted the institution. They had no reason to think about you at all. That was the access you exploited. You turned their indifference into a vulnerability, and you worked it for 3.5 years. Every person on that spreadsheet is living with that now. Marcus Dell Hargrove was sentenced to 204 months in federal prison, 17 years, to be served at the Federal Correctional Institution in Jessup, Georgia. He was ordered to pay restitution of $1,847,312.44, was joint and several with any co-conspirators identified in subsequent proceedings. He was permanently barred from federal employment in any capacity. He was 44 years old at sentencing. His earliest possible release date, with full good behavior credit, is September 12, 2038. He will be 58 years old. Dorothy Pruitt recovered $6,200 of her $19,400 loss through the USPS Postal Inspection Service Victim Restitution Program, which processes claims on a rolling basis tied to the defendant's restitution payment schedule. The remaining $13,200 was listed as outstanding at the time of sentencing. Her supplemental health insurance has not been reinstated. Gerald and Patricia Ames received a formal acknowledgement letter from the USPS Office of the Inspector General and were refunded their $4,300 in accumulated late fees by their mortgage lender after a 6-month administrative dispute. They received no restitution payment from Hargrove. Kevin Okafor did not recover his $3,500 earnest money. He has not purchased a home. The Decatur Central Delivery Unit at 880 Commerce Drive implemented a mandatory dual scan protocol for all outgoing first-class letter mail in October of 2023, 1 month after the arrest. The USPS Inspector General issued a district-wide audit recommendation in November of 2023, requiring supervisory review of complaint correlation data on a monthly basis rather than quarterly. That change, the change that, had it been in place 2 years earlier, would have surfaced Hargrove's pattern in mid-2021, was ratified across the Northern Georgia District in January of 2024. Hargrove's sorting station at the Commerce Drive facility was reassigned to a new carrier the morning after his arrest. Someone on the next shift found his coffee cup still on the table, cold by then, and threw it away. If you sat with this story long enough, you know why it stays. A man who spent 11 years being exactly who the institution needed him to be, spent 3.5 of those years being someone else entirely, and the institution never once looked. Subscribe. We cover cases like this every week.